The making of the Marauders' map. The torchlight flickered along the cold stone walls of Hogwarts as 4 figures slipped through the shadowed corridors. James Potter led the way, his invisibility cloak draped over himself and his 3 closest friends, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. "If Filch catches us again," Peter whispered nervously, his voice trembling, "he'll have our heads mounted in his office." "Relax, Wormtail," James grinned, adjusting his glasses as they crept around a corner. "That's what makes it fun. Besides, we're on the verge of something brilliant." Sirius chuckled softly, his grey eyes gleaming with mischief. "You're too paranoid. And anyway, if we pull this off, Filch won't catch us ever again." They stopped in front of a locked door. Sirius, ever the impatient one, flicked his wand with a casual confidence. Alohomora. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty, forgotten classroom. Broken desks leaned against the walls, cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the faint smell of old parchment lingered in the air. It wasn't much to look at, but it was theirs. This hidden room had become their sanctuary, a place where secrets were born. James lit the torches with a quick spell and dropped the invisibility cloak on a nearby chair. "All right," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's get to work." It had all started months earlier, on a rainy afternoon in the Gryffindor common room. James and Sirius were sprawled across the hearthrug, tossing crumpled bits of parchment at each other instead of focusing on their half-finished transfiguration essays. Remus sat in an armchair, as usual, absorbed in a thick leather-bound book. Peter hunched over a charms assignment, chewing nervously on the end of his quill. "You know," Sirius mused, twirling his quill between his fingers, "we spend half our time sneaking around. Wouldn't it be easier if we just knew where everyone was?" James's eyes sparkled with sudden excitement. "Imagine it, if we had a way to track Filch, we'd never get caught. No more detentions." Remus lowered his book, considering the idea with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "And," he added quietly, "it could help us with the full moon. If we knew when the coast was clear, sneaking out to the shack would be much safer." At his words, the room grew a little more serious. For all their jokes and pranks, Remus's monthly transformations were no laughing matter. The other 3 had become animagi to help him through his werewolf curse, but the risk of discovery was always there. Anything that could make their dangerous excursions easier was worth pursuing. Peter scratched his head. But how would we even do that? Hogwarts doesn't exactly give out blueprints. James leaned forward eagerly, his eyes sparkling with the kind of excitement that only came from a truly brilliant idea. His fingers drummed lightly against the edge of the desk, an unconscious sign of his restless energy. "Hogwarts is full of magic. If anyone can map it, it's us." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the spark of possibility ignited in each of the Marauders' minds. For a moment, everything else faded away. It wasn't just about avoiding detention anymore. It was about something far grander. The idea of mapping the entire castle, of capturing every hidden passage, every secret room, every inch of this ancient, sprawling school took on a life of its own. "Think about it," Sirius said, leaning back in his chair with a devil-may-care grin on his face. "No more running into Filch in the hallways, no more dodging prefects, and, best of all, no one will ever be able to catch us." "Exactly," James added, his voice tinged with the thrill of the idea. "We'd know the school better than anyone. We'd have the perfect map, the ultimate weapon for mischief." He paused for a moment, letting the full weight of it sink in, his eyes scanning the others as if daring them to dream as big as he was. and think about the possibilities. We'd never miss a prank opportunity again. The teachers won't stand a chance. Sirius chuckled. We'll be like ghosts, slipping through the halls without anyone even knowing we're there. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on James. All right, Prongs. You've sold us. But how exactly are we going to do this? Hogwarts is huge. You can't just wave your wand and poof, a map appears. James shot Sirius a look that was half exasperation, half amusement. Of course, Padfoot. I know it's not that simple. But that's why we're here. We're not just going to map the school. We're going to make the map alive. His voice dropped a little and his grin widened. Something that moves with us, keeps track of everything, every secret passage, every hidden room, and most importantly, where everyone is at all times. Remus, who had been silently absorbing the conversation, finally broke his focus from the swirling fire in the fireplace and looked over at James. The flicker of curiosity in his eyes told James that the idea was beginning to take hold. All right, Remus said as he pushed aside a few stray books and cleared space on the floor. His voice always carried a sense of calm deliberation, the steady anchor to their wild ideas. If we're doing this, it has to be perfect. This isn't some half-baked prank. We want a map of the entire castle, every room, every passage, every inch of hidden space. We want something that can withstand time, something that won't lose its magic, no matter how much we use it. And most importantly, we need to track where everyone is at all times. There was a pause as the words hung in the air, and for the first time, the gravity of the project began to settle in. What had started as a way to dodge detentions, a simple plan to avoid being caught by Argus Filch, had suddenly transformed into something much more ambitious. A project that would require every ounce of their talent and ingenuity. It was no longer just about avoiding trouble. It was about controlling it, about shaping the very fabric of the Hogwarts to their will. Yeah, no pressure then, Sirius said, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. We're not just mapping the halls. We're going to map the whole bloody castle, from the dungeons to the highest tower, every single broom cupboard, every hidden nook and cranny. And we need it to work all the time. He laughed, running a hand through his messy hair. It's going to take ages. We've got time, James said confidently, his eyes never leaving the parchment that Remus had just unrolled. And besides, it'll be worth it. We'll be able to see everything. Peter, who had been quietly listening up until now, suddenly raised his hand like he was still sitting in Transfiguration class. But how will we know where everyone is? I mean, the map has to show us more than just the layout of the castle, right? His voice wavered slightly, unsure, but he was genuinely trying to contribute. James smiled and pointed at Peter with an imaginary wand. Exactly, Wormtail. That's where the magic gets interesting. The map won't just be a static blueprint. It'll track everyone's movements too. Every time someone moves, the map will update itself. If we combine the imprinting hex with the Appare Vestigia charm Remus found, we'll be able to see where everyone is. Teachers, students, ghosts, even Filch and Mrs. Norris. We'll have a moving, living map of Hogwarts. Peter's eyes widened. So we can see where everyone is. Everyone, Remus confirmed with a small, satisfied smile, as if the idea had already started to take shape in his mind. The magic will track them based on their magical signature. Each person leaves behind a trace whenever they perform magic or move through the halls, and once we get the map going, it will constantly update itself. We won't have to worry about it ever going out of date. We'll be able to see what's happening everywhere at all times. Sirius, who had been quiet for a moment, let out a low whistle. I like the sound of that. We'll know where everyone is. We can avoid the troublemakers, outsmart the teachers, and maybe even find out where Dumbledore's hiding that sword of his. He shot James a wink, clearly already envisioning all the ways they could use the map to their advantage. "We've got to be careful, though," Remus added, his voice serious for a moment. "This is dangerous magic. It's not just about creating a map, it's about binding the magic to the castle itself. If we mess up the enchantments, it could backfire. We need to make sure everything is stable, that the spells don't become uncontrollable." James, who had been scanning the magical text spread before them, looked up with an excited grin. "We'll take it slow. First, we trace every hallway and passage, note down every bit of magic we find, and then we'll combine the spells step by step. We've got the talent to pull this off. And when we're done, we'll have the map of the century." For a brief moment, they all sat in silence, the weight of their shared ambitions settling over them. It wasn't just a project anymore. It was something bigger than any of them had imagined. A chance to leave their mark on Hogwarts in a way no one else ever could. "All right then," James said, breaking the silence and standing up, his voice filled with determination. "Let's get to work. The Marauders' map is about to become a reality." And with that, the plan consumed them. The idea, once a mere way to get out of trouble, became their obsession. Nights turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, each Marauder taking his turn to work on the map. Their shared goal, their determination to see this through, made every setback worth it. They weren't just making a map. They were creating something that would change everything about their time at Hogwarts. They were crafting a legend. "Easy," Sirius said, propping his feet on a chair, "except for the part where it's completely impossible." James pulled a shimmering silver quill from his bag, the spoils of a recent midnight raid on the restricted section. He could still feel the thrill of that night, the dimly lit aisles, the quick, hushed footsteps as they slipped past Madame Pince's office. James had learned long ago that magic had its own set of rules, and breaking those rules was part of the fun. The quill in his hand was evidence of their success. The elegant, flowing design of the nib seemed to shimmer in the dim candlelight as if it were alive. "This quill is enchanted to trace magical signatures," James said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "It records any magical energy that passes through it, including the faintest traces left by spells. It's as if it can't see the magic we use, even long after we've cast it. If we combine it with the revealing charm we learned last week, it should record every step we take, every action, every movement, every corner of Hogwarts we explore." Sirius leaned forward, his feet resting on an overturned chair. "Brilliant, James. So we can literally paint our path through the castle, and the quill will track everything." His voice was laced with the usual excitement, the promise of mischief and adventure in every syllable. "Exactly," James said, his smile widening. He twirled the quill between his fingers, imagining the possibilities. "And once we've mapped everything out, we'll just have to figure out how to make the map update itself. No more having to redo it every time we explore. We could track Filch, sneak around undetected, and maybe even find some of those hidden rooms that no one talks about." Peter's eyes narrowed, already skeptical. "But what if we miss something? What if we wander off track, or the magic doesn't work the way we think it will?" James chuckled and slapped Peter on the back. "That's the fun part, Wormtail. If everything was predictable, it wouldn't be worth doing. We'll work it out. We always do." Peter mumbled something under his breath, still unsure, but he was too invested now to back out. It was in his nature to follow, even if he wasn't entirely convinced. Remus, however, was already turning the pages of his book with a quiet intensity. He had been the most reserved in the beginning, reluctant to dive headfirst into something so risky. But as the weeks had passed, he'd become the steadying force behind their wild ideas. His brow furrowed in concentration as he searched for the right spell. He had always been more methodical, more grounded, and his approach to magic reflected that. "There's a charm," Remus said softly, not looking up from his book, "called Appare Vestigia. It reveals recent magical traces, anything that has been magically active in the area in the last few hours. It's not as specific as the quill's enchantment, but it's a start. It can show us where magic has been used, even if the original spell is no longer visible." James's eyes widened in realization. So the Appare Vestigia will allow us to see not just the paths we're taking, but also any magical traces left by other students, teachers, or even creatures. That could be useful. We could see if someone's been through the hallways ahead of us. Sirius grinned. "And we'd know exactly where Filch has been skulking around." "Perfect. No more close calls with that greasy old bat." Remus nodded but didn't stop turning the pages. "But that's not enough. The map will only be useful if it updates in real time, if we don't have to stop and check every time we want to mark a new path." He stopped at a page near the back of the book, pointing to a complex-looking spell written in elegant, flowing script. "Here," Remus said, "there's something called an imprinting hex. It's used to bind magical actions to a physical object. In this case, the quill. We can combine it with the Appare Vestigia charm, and once the quill has traced the magical signature, the imprinting hex will ensure that the map records it instantly, without us having to do anything. We won't have to stop every few feet to mark where we've been. The map will just update itself, continuously, in real time." James's face lit up with understanding. "That's genius, Remus. If we bind the magic to the quill, then the map will essentially remember every action. And the quill won't just track our movements, it'll track anyone else's too. We'll know where everyone is at all times." Peter, who had been listening intently, suddenly perked up. "Wait, so we can see where Filch is, but we can also see where the teachers are? And anyone else who's sneaking around, like us?" Remus met his eyes and gave a small nod. "Yes, the map will show everything. The staff, the students, even the ghosts. It will record the entire magical landscape of Hogwarts. We just have to make sure the magic stays anchored to the castle's foundations, or else the enchantments will fade." Sirius leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with mischief. "This could be the best thing we've ever done. Forget Quidditch. We'll be the kings of Hogwarts." Remus glanced up, finally closing the book with a soft thud. "It's not just about mischief. Think about it, James. If we can track the movements of the entire school, it could help us when things get tricky. Like with the full moon. We'll know when it's safe to leave the castle, when it's clear to go to the shack." James's smile faltered for a brief moment, a shadow passing over his features. Remus was right. The map could be more than just a tool for pranks. It could be a lifeline for their friend, for Remus. He cleared his throat, shaking off the sudden seriousness. "Right, of course, but for now, let's focus on the fun part. The mischief. First things first, we need to make sure the spells are properly set up." James held up the quill, ready to begin the first test. "We'll need to get everything right. The Appare Vestigia charm will show us the traces, and the imprinting hex will make sure it all gets recorded. We'll bind the magic to the castle itself so it never fades. And once that's done, we'll have our map. complete with moving dots showing the locations of everyone in the school. Sirius grinned wickedly. Can you imagine the looks on the teachers' faces when they realise they're being watched by a bunch of fifth-year Gryffindors? Brilliant. Just brilliant. Remus gave a small, knowing smile. It's going to take more than one try, but we'll get it right. We always do. With that, the Marauders continued their work, the quill glowing faintly in the dim light of the abandoned classroom, their plans slowly starting to come to life. Each of them knew that this would be no small feat, that the magic they were attempting was both dangerous and complex. But they also knew that the bond they shared, the thrill of doing something no one else could, made it all worth it. By day, they were ordinary students. By night, beneath the cloak of invisibility, they prowled the castle's corridors. Every hallway, every staircase, no matter how twisting, was traced. Each time they uncovered a hidden passage, they marked it down. James and Sirius fine-tuned the imprinting hex. Remus, meticulous as always, calibrated the tracking spells. Even Peter, despite his grumbling, proved useful in slipping through narrow gaps the others couldn't manage. But their first attempt ended in disaster. "I think I've got it," James announced one night, his wand poised over the parchment. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." Ink spread across the parchment, but instead of a map, jagged squiggles danced across the surface before the page went blank. "Fantastic," Sirius groaned, running a hand through his hair. "We've wasted weeks, and it doesn't even work." Remus frowned, studying the parchment with a critical eye. The imprinting hex needs to be anchored to something constant, something connected to the castle's magic. James raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like Hogwarts itself," Remus murmured. "The castle's magic is ancient. If we bind the map to the castle's wards, it should stabilize." It took another month of late nights and whispered spells, but at last, their patience paid off. One snow-covered December night, they gathered in the abandoned classroom for the final test. James touched his wand to the parchment, heart pounding. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." This time the ink did not falter. Lines stretched out across the page, crisp and clear. Hogwarts blossomed to life in miniature. Corridors winding like veins, secret tunnels snaking to unknown corners. Small dots, each labelled with a name, moved steadily along the lines. "Merlin's beard," Sirius breathed. "It's perfect." Peter, wide-eyed, pointed to a dot labelled Argus Filch. "He's 2 floors above us. We can see everyone." James laughed softly, his chest swelling with pride. "We did it." Sirius grinned. "It needs a name, something impressive." "The Marauders' map," James declared, and with a flourish he scrawled across the top, "Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs proudly present the Marauders' map." But the map was more than just a tool for pranks, it was a symbol of their friendship. Each night, they added new discoveries and protective spells. If anyone tried to read it without the password, the map would insult them relentlessly. One evening, as they studied the map in the common room, Sirius asked, "Think anyone else will ever find this?" James smirked. "Maybe, but they'll have to be clever enough to deserve it." Years later, hidden in a forgotten drawer in Filch's office, the map would find new hands. 2 red-haired pranksters would uncover it, their mischief echoing that of the 4 boys who had come before. And so the magic lived on.